Welcome. I'm just going to give it a second so that people can filter in, as it were. It's great to see so many people joining us tonight. Well, it seems like we have a really healthy group of people with us already. So um, let me get started. I am delighted to welcome you to our program this evening, honoring the legacy of Emma Amos. My name is Linnea West. I work in public programs at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. As we begin, I'd like to state that the Philadelphia Museum of Art recognizes Philadelphia as part of Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral homelands of the Lenape peoples. A long history of broken treaties, forced migrations, and fraudulent agreements displaced many Lenape from this land. We at the museum strive to understand our place within the legacy of colonization and to act as allies to Lenape people and their vibrant communities today, including the federally recognized tribes, Delaware Tribe, Delaware Nation, and the Stockbridge-Munsee community. We pay honor and respect to Lenape ancestors past and present by committing to build a more inclusive and equitable space for all. And on view in our galleries now at the Philadelphia Museum of Art is Emma Amos' Color Odyssey. I'm putting a link to the exhibition in the chat. It will be up through January 17th. So if you're a local and you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to do so because it is a beautiful, energizing, rich show. And if you've already seen it, I hope tonight offers you a deeper dive and perhaps a new perspective on Amos's printmaking practice. Tonight we are going to be thinking about the artistic legacy that Amos worked within and also expanded for the next generation of artists. To that end, we are joined by artist Stephanie Santana and Tanekeya Word and curator Laurel Garber. So thank you all for joining me, and I'll just share a little bit about our speakers. Stephanie is a textile artist, fine art printmaker, and illustrator based in Brooklyn. Through the use of archival family photographs and documents, often dating from the era of Jim Crow and the American Civil Rights Movement, her work addresses themes of interiority, identity, and cultural preservation, traversing the space between memory and the physical evidence of Black life. Tanekeya creates multimedia visual art, including paintings, drawings, fine art prints, and book art. She is an art educator, cultural arts organizer, and scholar based in Milwaukee. Tanekeya is the owner and sole operator of Womanist Press Studio, and she's the founder of the artist collective Black Women of Print. Laurel is the Park Family Assistant Curator of Prints and Drawings and curator in Philadelphia of Emma Amos' Color Odyssey. Laurel contributed an essay in the exhibition catalog, edited by Dr. Shania Harris, on the topic of Amos's experimental printmaking in the 1970s and 1980s and her work with professional printers. So, welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
So, our intention is gathering tonight to honor the work of Emma Amos, and we're going to do that by starting with a look at some of the prints with Laurel. Then Tanekeya and Stephanie will share new work made specifically in honor of Amos on the occasion of this major survey before moving into a discussion. We are saving time at the end for your questions and your thoughts, and I hope you will have a lot to share with us as well. So just a few notes before we do get started. As I mentioned, we're saving time for Q&A. We ask that you put your questions in the Q&A box. It has a helpful upvote feature. You can use the thumbs up button if you see a question you like, and that question will go to the top of the queue. And those are the ones we'll get to first when we get into Q&A. The chat is open. People are sharing where they're tuning in from. We'd love to learn where you're joining us from. Captions are available. You can click the CC button to turn on closed captioning. And finally, we are recording tonight's program. We're going to send a follow-up email after the program. It'll have a link to the recording. It'll also include any other links that we share in the chat, so you can refer back to anything we talk about tonight. All that said, Laurel, I'm happy for you to take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Linnea, and thank you so much, Tanekeya and Stephanie, for joining us tonight. Just going to repeat some of what Linnea said. I'm Laurel Garber. I'm the PMA curator of Emma Amos' Color Odyssey, an exhibition on view through January 17th here in Philadelphia. And the exhibition was organized by Shania Harris at the Georgia Museum of Art in Athens, Georgia. And I just want to thank Shania once again for her and her colleagues for developing such an important survey of Amos's works. And let me just advance the slides here. In discussing the plans for tonight's program, the other speakers and I agreed that we would like to start our evening with Emma Amos's remarkable works. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes showing some of these images and briefly sharing a few thoughts about them before turning it over to Tanekeya and Stephanie's work. Amos's printmaking is one of the strong emphases of the exhibition here in Philadelphia. The show includes some of her earliest prints, two of which I show you here, etchings made in the late 1950s in London, and some of her latest made in the 2000s. But it focuses especially on Amos's figurative prints from the 1970s and 80s. In thinking about and looking at Amos's prints, I always have ringing in my ears something that she says in an interview in 1968, a number of years after she had settled in New York, following her childhood spent in Atlanta and her studies in London and in Ohio. And she says, quote, "When I do prints, one of the reasons I get so interested is that with all the leftover bits and pieces, I always make collages. And collage is a marvelous way of working, picking up things and moving them around." Amos's prints almost always entail a range of graphic techniques, often combining and layering them, taking them apart and creating them anew. And in her mature work, we can see that technical variety at its fullest tilt in her depiction of the human figure, and especially the female figure of color. These figures themselves end up looking composite and fragmented, made up of different pieces. And one of the things I love so much about Amos, though, is that this kind of breaking up and putting back together always feels humanizing, aimed at getting closer to lived experience, at capturing a reality that she sees with remarkable insight and compassion. Amos aimed, in her words, to depict what we really see, the range of people I see on the subway. And I think we can see this collage-like approach to technique, materials, and the figure especially well in Three Ladies, which is the print I'm showing you here. The print combines multiple printmaking techniques across 5 separate sheets of paper and mylar, and depicts 3 figures, 2 of which are practically at life size. And the visible combination of techniques and textures here emphasizes the figures as wholes made up of distinct parts, different printmaking plates, different sheets of paper, different layers of color and tone. And in an interview, again, Amos says, I quote, "I have to make choices every time I make a figure. I try to include what we really see, which is one of the reasons I use so many different colors of skin tone." As Three Ladies suggests, getting at what we really see is complicated work. For Amos, it requires dramatic interventions into the material processes of image making. And as she mixes and matches different papers and techniques, we see Amos here doing something she liked to do very often: scramble expectations about how Black artists can or should depict figures, exposing and relishing in the shapes and tones and colors of people in the world. And I think we really get a sense of this in Amos's prints from the 1980s that depict female bathers in reclining positions, with their hands on their hips, like you see here, and their leisurely poses and arrangements. These women appear at ease on their patterned towels and their poolside settings. They bring an intimacy and a self-possession to the classical art historical motif of the female bather, who appears here as a Black woman and a full subject, meeting the viewer's eye with warmth and directness. And here too, I see again the fascinating element of collage or picking up and moving things around, as Amos made these compositions by physically cutting and recombining her printmaking plates, using the gaps between the plates to create dynamically poised and overlapping figures. And Amos especially takes this method further in this pair of works that I'm showing you right here. To make the work at right, she tore up a previous impression of the print that I'm showing you at left, collaged the scraps into a totally new piece, once again stretching her materials and the conventions of traditional practice in order to give shape and body to her subjects. And that's just a bit about what I've been thinking with as I sit with this work and try to keep up with at least some of what Amos does in print. And I'm so eager to hear from you, Tanekeya and Stephanie, about what you see in Amos's work. To my mind, surveying Amos's accomplishments is incomplete without seeing how her work continues to live and move through others. So you and the Black women of print space came to mind immediately when thinking about her work and thinking about programming related to our exhibition. The work you're doing seems to extend so meaningfully and beautifully a legacy that includes Amos. And I'm just really thrilled that this event and collaboration could take place tonight. And I just want to share the next slide and ask you to speak about it really, and to tell us both about yourselves, but also about the Black Women of Print group. And perhaps the ways that Amos's work is alive, both in your individual practices and also in this collective effort. And as Linnea mentioned, we have exciting slides of the works that you've made today and also process shots. So let me know if you want me to move through those as you're speaking.
I just like to say that thank everyone for being here, but also I'm really interested, especially founding Black Women of Print. We want to make sure all together that we have this, what Erin Christabel calls a legacy praxis, something that is circular and expansive when we are looking at the work of our foremothers. So not that we're just taking on everything that they've learned within their praxis, that we're giving something back as well. And within scholarship, we always look at where is the gap. And to have something that's circular and expansive, you have to actually look at the work, read the text or the visuals as well, and then see where you can expand on. So it's not like taking, you know, so I want to just make that very clear in which we do the visibility. We want to make sure that we are expanding their legacies for Black Women of Print.
That's great, thank you. And yeah, I mean, would you mind just telling our audience a little bit about the founding of this group and the current members and part of what you do together or separately?
Yes, so I contacted Delita Martin first. I did an interview with her and I talked to her about this idea that I had. I was in my my doctoral program at the time. And in order for me to have a bit of sanity, I started taking some more printmaking classes. And I picked up this huge book and it was about women printmakers from the 1800s. And I'm just scrolling through, looking, and I saw two Black women printmakers in 400 pages. And I said, oh no, this isn't true. Like, you know, well-deserved. Elizabeth Catlett was in there and also Margaret T.G. Burroughs, like totally well-deserved. But where are the other women? So I contacted Alita, told her I had this idea about a collective, let her know all these, you know, things that I really wanted to do with it. And she said, whatever you need, I'm there. So then she told me about Latoya Hobbs and contacted Latoya Hobbs. And then from there, I contacted Angela Pilgrim. And then Angela Pilgrim told me about Jennifer Mack Watkins and later on, Leslie Goodgood. And I had known Stephanie for decades, well, like at least almost 2 decades at the time. And I contacted Stephanie and she was also excited to do it. So after that, Ann Johnson, who is also a part of RU, which is Delita's other collective, came on for cohort 1. And we just announced cohort 2, which we have Dr. Deborah Grayson Althea Gibson, Karen Revis, and also Chloe Alexander. So we're just extremely excited to have it expanded.
That's wonderful. And so the plan will be to have cohorts going forward. Is that?
Yeah, so we are looking at having cohorts annually, and to only have it like, about 5 people so that they can get acclimated and we can get acclimated with them. And from the founding members, Angela Pilgrim, Jennifer Mack Watkins, and then she was in between like cohort 1 and founding member Leslie Duguid. They have all left to do other things that they like to do.
Mhm. Well, great. And so perhaps we can move ahead to some of the slides, but
Yeah.
I don't know if you or Stephanie want to speak a little bit to your kind of relation to Emma Amos's work. I know for you, it's Amos has been someone you've been looking at and thinking about for a long time. And I would just love to hear your reaction to the show, which you visited recently, and what it's been like to think with her as you made a new print.
Yes.
Well,
So oh, sorry, was that Steph talking?
no, go ahead.
Okay, no, Steph, go. Go.
Yeah, I had some thoughts about my connection to Emma Amos's work, and we did see the show, Laurel, which you know, and we're so gracious, you and Linnea, to take us around, and it was just incredible. I think we spent maybe 2 hours in the show, just kind of getting really close to the work, and just kind of absorbing all of it. But there's 2 ways personally which I see a thread between Emma Amos's work and my work. Because as a textile artist, I really connect with the way that she worked in textiles and collage, and the way that she worked with family photographs as well, which you all will see later in my works today. And as was said earlier, that I work with archival photographs. So I've just in reading more about her work and learning more about her praxis and her background, there was just so many connections. Like, she taught textile design in the 1970s at the Newark School of Fine and Industrial Arts, and was teaching weaving classes. But I think at the time she said, she said in an interview in 1993 with Bell Hooks, that she knew not to admit that she was a weaver because she said people would hold that against her. And she said it was just, it was just a smart thing to keep your mouth shut and not admit it, which I think she was one of the artists that kind of pioneered that beginning to change in blending the craft with fine art. And there's a whole bunch of other Black women artists that I really look to, such as Faith Ringgold, Jeeves Bend, Rosie Lee Tompkins, who were and are quilt makers, and are using that medium to tell a personal narrative and to tell about their, to speak about their lived experiences. So I think another thing I was really connecting with was the fact that she worked on or came up with the idea actually for the public access show of Hands from 1977 to 1979, which she was taping in Boston while she was living in New York. And just as a mom who's homeschooling myself and doing things like potato print activities and lots of craft projects and making pot holders, that's something that she was doing with this show, where she was educating people through public access television about different crafts. And she said it taught her that she could learn how to do something and take it through to the end, see an idea through from start to finish. And that when that ended in 1979, that she was like, I have to figure out a way to bring that craft element into my art. So I think those are things that I think about when I'm creating and want to continue to expand upon.
And as for me, I look at Emma Amos in several ways. I'm also a painter. She was a painter, and also within printmaking, but specifically her intellectual thoughts. She was an avid reader, such as myself. Also, she was a postmodernist, which is a theory that I align with, and I'll talk, more about that later. So there are a lot of threads that Emma Amos and I share, as well as being an advocate who says exactly what they mean. No, and that's something that I look up to her for showing up in her wholeness.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Oh, hi, Stephanie. There you are now. Okay, may I advance to the next slide, Tanekeya?
Of course.
Is that
Yes.
okay? Okay.
Yes.
Did that work? There we go.
Okay, there you go. So I'd like to talk a bit about the process in making the work that is a homage to Emma Amos. I had looked forever for a notebook fabric because I had an idea in my head. I could never find it. And then when visiting Philadelphia, Stephanie and I went to the fabric workshop. And when I walked in, I saw the fabric that I had been searching for 2 years. And I was like, Stephanie, I have to get this fabric. And then when they pulled it out, I read the border and I said, no way. It was the notebook design by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. And it was created in 1983, which is my birth year. They are very well known in Philadelphia, and also anyone who understands urban planning or architectural theory, which I took a lot of graduate level courses for, like hundreds of hours in, trying to understand spatiality more. And I was just so taken aback because they were also postmodernists too, was and are postmodernists. And so the piece that I made also borrows from Alice Walker. So we have Alice Walker, whose ovarian text, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, was also created in 1983. The design for this in 1983. My birth year is 1983, and the works that I am looking at, range from the 80s to the 2000s for Emma Amos. So it all started with notes, which I call fragment materials. So notes and fabric. So I'm super excited to show you all the next thing that I started working on within the process of the Emma Amos work.
I love that. Just to comment really quickly on that. I mean,
Yeah.
it just makes me think of that quote from Amos that she works with the leftover bits, the fragments.
Yes. And so I'm always thinking about fractals and fragmentation within my work, and understanding that within postmodern theory, there is no concreteness. So that's kind of like understanding as a Black woman within the arts and in society. I'm looking at how we are at the intersections of fixed localizations for our self-identities, as well as migratory geographies as Black folks. So this is a monoprint, varied monoprints that I decided to do. And I was thinking about crown a lot within the work, and how the past, the present, and the future all is embedded within the hairstyle. Also, I was looking at Miss Otis because I come from a matriarchal lineage of women with sass. I also birthed a daughter with sass. So the gaze, and I want to say the Black gaze in Emma Amos' work is powerful, because her figures are showing you exactly who they are unapologetically, void of respectability politics or Victorian virtues. So those are the type of women or protagonists I even love within literature, and also that you will see in all of my artwork. They are sassy women, not the kind, as I said before, that derives from respectability politics, more of womanish, which expanded into womanism. So you will see the textures within the different monoprints for the face. I pulled those colors also from the colors that are in Crown as well. So this is the finished piece where you see the borders for the work, and the title is Notes from Our Mother's Garden, Still Some Do's and Don'ts. And Emma Amos has a wonderful text called Some Do's and Don'ts as well. And what I did was I've read this text over and over. And as I was reading it, I started looking at my marginalia within the text. And it reverted back to the thought of circular and expansive. And a text as a fragmentary material is the perfect example, especially when you begin to annotate and have marginalia there, to show that something that we consider maybe be an answer is more so a question, because we begin to expand and take it further when we insert ourselves into those image narratives that people, write. So I'll show you two of the things that I pulled out for the marginalia in the next. On the right, I wrote "Do be thankful" and "Shout Ashe" for Emma Amos, a wonder. In the text, she paid homage to a lot of her peers. And she entered it by saying, "Do be thankful and shout hallelujah." And because she is now an ancestor, I'm always thinking about the dichotomy between hallelujah and ashe for African and African Americans or Black folks. So we are in between those things within the spirituality or religion from hence we came and where we are now. And then I also wrote on the left hand, "Don't complain about being a Black woman artist in the 2020s. She said the 80s, but this is still happening. So that's why I call it still some do's and don'ts. On the borders, you'll also see the X's. Some of them are close together to notate the XX chromosome that is gender-based for gender-assigned womanhood. And then you will also notice that she used the X in a lot of her works to talk about the cancellation or in other terms, things that we cannot, do as a Black woman within society, within that fixed social construct. In the next slide, this is more details. Within the eyes, I wanted to actually bring out something that was a bit ethereal. When they say that the eyes are the windows to the soul, I'm always thinking about subaltern spaces, especially as Black folks. We have to think in terms of the fact that a lot of the things that we go through are things that are based on memory and rememory. And also, these are things that you can feel. Sometimes you don't necessarily have the words for it, but you can feel it. So I wanted to have something that was very ethereal, more spiritual within the eyes, and to also do that within the body, the figure. On the right-hand side, you'll see that I actually took some handmade paper and tore it. This is a technique that Emma Amos used in some of her work. Although the pieces weren't as small, she'd have some pieces that were a bit larger that she'll tear and then place back together. And it was this picking up and putting it back together to create a whole other subject that I was interested in. Also underlining the point of fractal and fragmentation as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we'll move along to Stephanie's print, and then I hope to come back to these in the rest of our discussion. Oh, you're muted, Stephanie.
Okay, I'm back. Having a little technical difficulty. So in thinking about, as I said, I really connect with Emma Amos's work with both textiles and collage. So when I started thinking about this, I started thinking about the way that I use textiles in my work. And you'll see here on the left, there's a small piece of quilter's cotton, which is the same textile that I use in most of my work with archival photographs and most of my quilted pieces. So I was starting to mix the ink and sort of match that back toward the second layer that was going to go onto the print. And then you also see me printing in the textile studio, which is the yardage table here, when I was working through the addition. So we can advance to the next slide. So this work, when I was thinking about Emma Amos and the way that she talked about lived experiences in a lot of her works, as someone who's in, a lot of different situations, we're all kind of, especially during this pandemic, I was thinking about a lot of the things that I was feeling in this particular time, and the way that she kind of used that to speak about the power of Black women. And you'll see here, there's 2 different photographs that I've used, and a lot of the way that I use imagery is repetition, because I'm also interested in dualities and the fact that, 2 or more things can be true at once. So I have, you'll see on the left, there's a crown that is from the Ivory Coast. It's a crown that's sort of emblematic of women's society. And there's, it's enlarged to kind of show that even though that crown of ancestry, that link back to ancestry that we often find in Amos's work as well, with her use of African fabric, that we can handle a lot of these pressures that we're feeling. And you'll also see that there's, I think maybe we should advance to the next slide because it'll be a little easier to see some of these details. Right, so there's also the 2 women on the left, or on the right, which is a image of a debutante, which was actually taken by my grandfather. And it's an original print that I took this from, and I scanned it and translated it into screen print, which was sort of reminiscent of a lot of the ways that I've seen some of these photographs reproduced in newsprint and other places. So essentially it was just a statement on the pressure that we often feel, and the pressure cooker that we're often in these situations where we have a lot of roles to play. And I think that's something that Amos commented on frequently. So we can advance to the next slide. And this is also showing some of the fabric details that I've included, just highlighting this checkered pattern, which for me is very symbolic of weaving. It's like the warp and the weft. So you'll see that in a lot of my works as well, that I'm, because I have a history of working in textile design and working with weavings. And so that's something that I wanted to link back to in terms of her work. And the glove as well is sort of symbolizing that expectation of us to sort of be put together at all times, and the pressure that we often feel.
Great.
So
Thank you so much. I'm gonna actually stop sharing my screen so that we can have more of a discussion together. Okay, you're no longer seeing my screen, right?
Correct. But Laurel, I wondered if we could take a quick look at the final works by Tanekeya and Stephanie, just to
Sure.
refresh everyone's minds, because we saw so many detail shots, just to
Of
look at the
course,
final look of the 2
yes.
images. Thank you.
So here is Stephanie's. And here's Tanekeya's. And I will now stop sharing, but we can go back to them at any time. So I was hoping to ask a question of both of you, and with tonight's program in mind, and that being honoring the legacy of Emma Amos, I wanted to ask about the word legacy in this context, and I think this has already come up tonight, but legacy and living tradition, and especially who gets included in what traditions and who doesn't, feels very important to Amos's work, especially for the ways that she thinks about other Black women artists. But also I think in the ways that she uses certain materials like textile. So Stephanie, like you were just touching on this, it basically makes me think about the way that tradition functions often as a material practice. And I'm just wondering if that's something that rings true for both of you, or if you see your work, and I think this is already clear from what you've said, in relation to something like a legacy or tradition or ancestral practice. Is this something that you work through materially as well as thematically?
Yes, for me, Black artistic cultural production is the nexus for the work in general, and I continually look at literature first. I have an English background, So I'm always looking at literature. And what I do is I have notes everywhere. So what I decided to do was to start making commonplace notebooks. So I have one of them here. So I had like 7 made from Jana Twigs from Twigs Bindery, and it holds a lot of the information that I've stored in my mind or the questions that I have. And I start from there, and then I go into research mode, and then the visual references kind of occur. So I always start with text, or as I stated before, like these fragment materials.
Um, I think the way that I think about her work in terms of memory and tradition is, I think a lot about the way that she uses photographs and documented events and writings. There's an element of her looking at history, but there's also an element of her thinking about the way that she imagines things to be. So there's one work that she did that I was looking at a lot called A Reading at Bessie Smith's Grave, where she brings together these historical figures, some of which she knew personally, and she knew them well enough to know that they wouldn't necessarily want to share space. But she found a way to kind of create this alternate historical narrative. And she said that everything is a decision when you're creating, that, historians can kind of choose to use or not use his information, that she can paint history that she hadn't seen. So that's something that I'm working with, or a theme that I'm working with in my works, is using photographs, but also imbuing it with my own interpretation of those events and my own memories. So that's a theme that I'm continuing to work through. And it is a very material practice, because I think of every stitch and every, whether it's quilting or embroidery, it's a thread that I'm kind of pulling back to in terms of, the lineage of Black women artists and makers, and their production, as Tanekeya was speaking about, who, so a lot of their names, unfortunately, we don't know, but I just feel that when I'm creating.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, a related question, and one that will actually bring us back to the prints that you're presenting tonight, is how you think about the relation between your subject matter and the technique that you've chosen to work with. So as I said at the beginning, I think I'm fascinated by the kind of inextricability of the Amos's depiction of the figure, and then the kind of like printerly matter that she uses to depict it. And I'm just, curious to hear about how you choose, or how you chose specifically monotype Tanekeya for your image, for instance. If you could speak a little bit about, kind of relation between subject and material for you.
Yes. So because it's called Notes, I decided to use fabric for the border that actually is from a composition notebook style. And then from there, I looked, she uses a lot of stripes and wore a lot of linear textiles. And as Stephanie talked about before, within the loom, I looked at that. So I decided to use some stripes for the background. And then to think about the painterly print, that's, what monotypes or monoprints are often called, the painterly prints. I wanted to bring my painterly hand with printmaking. And that was an ode too, because I think that when she used monoprint, she also felt that this was the space where we could have that ebb and flow, the fluidity within print. Printmaking can be so rigid that if you miss a step, you basically, the print is over. So monoprint is like one of my favorites, where I know that there is no messing up, there's no concreteness. I can continue to expand on it. And so I decided to use that because I wanted them to see the handwork within that.
I think my connection to the materials, again, was just bringing in fabric that I've used. And that's kind of the basis for a lot of my work, and as well as bringing in painting, like mixing in raw pigments to paint the background, which I realized actually after I made it, that it did feel, there's so much movement in Emma Amos's work, and I felt like it was a little bit more, there was a more stillness in it with my work, which is something that I think is just part of my hand. And my visual language, but I also think it was, for me, with that particular piece, a comment on some of the boundaries that we've kind of been set within during this pandemic, because it was sort of a commentary on things that have been going on for a long time, in terms of, like I said, wearing a lot of different hats, playing a lot of different roles, as whether it be like a mother, friend, sister, daughter, but it's something that I did really feel when I was painting the brushstrokes, that I was sort of putting that emotion into the work, which I think this is something she did a lot of.
I did also want to note, as far as material, that I use soft pastel to highlight for that marginalia. I use soft pastel as well as the fabric. What I've been trying to do within my work most recently is to have this dichotomy between the domestic sphere and patriarchal sphere, considering the fact that printmaking is very heavy-handed with this patriarchal concept for the work, and then bringing in the use of fabric or soft pastels, which was historically seen as something that only women, do. So having that as a material reference, as a visual reference there. So I'm always using subcultural text underneath to go deeper with the meaning of why I use certain materials or why the work has a certain message as well.
I'm seeing some interest in the chat to look at more of your works and to look at the prints you've made again. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and move through. We have more slides of obviously the prints you've presented tonight, but also works outside of it that are part of your larger practice. So if it's okay with you, I'll share my screen and maybe ask you to speak towards some of the work that, that we move through. Let me just bring it up. So yeah, so we brought in a few additional pieces by each of you. So Tanekeya, do you want to speak a bit about this slide and the next one?
So this slide, as well as the next one, is from a series that I'm working on called Tender, a Sisterhood Anthem. And basically it speaks to the harmony between the relationship of the Black woman with each other, the ways in which that we care for ourselves and care for others. I use the African comb because it is given in times of joy or celebration, and also in times of grief. And during the pandemic, we have been experiencing both. We experience it all the time, especially as minoritized people. So then I decided to place the figure of the Black woman and the varied hairstyles that we have from past to present to future imaginations. Steffi and I have been on a parallel journey for ancestry. So I found out that a large base of my ancestry is Nigerian. So I wanted to make sure that, I reached back to start thinking about the ways in which we have used the comb. These are scaled up versions. The entire project is 100 combs that are drawn and then hand carved, and there are stories for each one. So my first artist book will be coming out next year with the entire series.
And just to ask quickly, do you see the homage print to Amos at all connected to these works?
Yes, very much so. The use of bringing in the hand, supposedly the woman's work within the embroidery for this hair, the patchwork quilting, which is specifically looked at as folk or craft. So it wasn't even considered a high art. Right now, we're seeing that quilt making or fabrics and textiles is being highlighted within a highbrow aesthetic, which, generally that was not the case. So I did an ode to the fact of Emma Amos and I are both Southern women as well. So, bringing the hand back into the work, as well as that sass. The sass is going to be consistent throughout all my figures.
Thank you. I keep going here to a couple additional works by Stephanie.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay. So this work is a diptych that I did earlier this year called The Watchful Eye. And this features 2 photographs that were from one trip to Terrell, Texas, that happened in 1954. And on the left, you'll see, and both images were actually made by my grandfather, Wendell Long, who was an educator and photographer in Dallas, Texas. And on the left, you see sort of my, that's my aunt surrounded by the purple, sort of looking over, watching over my great aunt and my mom on the right in sort of a protective way. And this is a living room scene that I've actually worked with several times in different works in my practice. But I was thinking about that interior life, and then on the right, sort of that exterior gaze, because it might be a little hard to see, but there's a detail slide on the, there's a detail shot on the next slide. This is, the 3 of them were at a train station, and my grandfather made the photo, and he, you know, at that time, I think they were just trying to document the moment, and, you know, because they were all saying goodbye, the trip was over. But on the door, you can see that it says colored, because this was during the 1950s in Texas. And that's, you know, that's what was going on at the time with segregation. But we always, you know, I grew up seeing this photograph, and we always saw that there was a figure sort of in the background. And we weren't sure, but it appeared to be somebody who was white. And we were just, it was kind of a joke in our family, like, you know, what is this person they're doing? They're in the wrong section, you know, knowing that had it been reversed, that would not have been accepted. So that's something that I wanted to highlight using embroidery. And that's just part of my process, is to layer the photography with sort of my own marks or my own meditations and thoughts on what's happening in the photographs. And we can move on to the next one. And this one is a, as I said before, I often duplicate imagery throughout my work. And it's kind of interesting. It's a little hard to see in this image, but if you see the piece in person, the imagery sort of changes depending on where it is, just by the way that the fabric shifts. But this was a photograph of my grandmother, and I was thinking about her role as a matriarch. And I connected with Emma Amos's use of photography as well, because a lot of her work, I think, was about invention and sort of exalting these family figures. So I was sort of thinking about the way that we put our matriarchs and we kind of uplift them, but I also wanted to make a work that was sort of protective, because the blue that's used in the background, as well as the monoprint brushstrokes, which I printed each panel individually and then pieced it together as a quilt. That haint blue is something that's used throughout the South on porches to kind of keep spirits away or keep bad energy away. So that, in terms of using that layering with the green pinwheel quilted pattern, which is a pattern that's often used, a traditional quilt pattern that's often used, was my way of sort of uplifting her and saying, like, this is a protective piece in your honor. Because of course she's an ancestor now. So that's my title reclamation. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. I think we want to open it up to any questions from our attendees, but maybe we could finish up our chat here with Stephanie, your kind of breaking news and your family's discovery with this slide here, and then we can open it up.
Right. So as I was researching Emma Amos's work, I came across this one, and of course I saw it in person in the show, and I was really drawn to it, and just, you know, because of the use of the photographs. But I really think there must have been a reason, because I was reading an article by Dr. Lisa Farrington, or a scholarly paper that she wrote called Emma Amos, Art as Legacy. And she was talking about how Emma Amos's mother, graduated from Fisk University in Nashville in 1930. And I was like, wait, I'm pretty sure my grandmother graduated from Fisk in 1930 as well, because I knew that she had gone to Fisk. And I knew that it was around that time. And I actually asked my father, I asked my dad, do you still have the yearbook? Let's see if India is in the yearbook. And he actually did find this image of her. And then I went back and I was like, that must have been the image that she was referencing. So that was pretty amazing. My grandmother and Emma Amos's mother, my grandmother, Emma Amos's mother, were in the same graduating class at Fisk. And my grandmother, Clarissa Levengood, studied French. India studied anthropology. And I think my grandmother was pledging Delta at the time, Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and India was already a Delta. So they might have, I'm sure they knew each other in some way, which is pretty incredible to discover.
That's amazing. And I think all the more, I don't know, incredible the ways that both you and Emma Amos have used images of these people in your art. And so, right, as you mentioned, My Mother's, My Sister's is an amazing work that's in the exhibition. So I will, Linnea, should I stop sharing my screen as we take more questions here?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And then everyone can see all of us. And I encourage you, for those of you out there, to, if you have a burning question, now is the moment to ask it, to put it in the Q&A box. If you see a question in the Q&A box you want to hear answered, you can give it a thumbs up. It'll go to the top of the queue. And to kick things off, I've had the chance of spending time with all of you and had such great discussions about Emma Amos. Maybe you could each just share a favorite work or a work of Amos's that you've been thinking about a lot lately.
Well, 3 Minute is a work that has struck me forever. But when I got to the exhibition, the water series actually really pulled me in. I stayed there forever while Stephanie was forever looking at the other image. But her works on paper really drew me in the most in the water series.
I would say for me, it's definitely My Mother's, My Sister's. And these works are not in the exhibition, but I also recently saw, and I highly recommend looking them up, her Odyssey series from 1988, because it has a lot of beautiful monoprint textures and photographs. And yeah, I've been thinking about that one a lot and I'm going to return to that one as well.
Laurel, what about you?
I can't really get enough of the bathers, really. And it's like such a thrill to bring a couple of them together for the show. So that's kind of, I keep really going back to the trio of bather scenes that we have installed and the kind of richly aqua tinted textures there. I have one more question, unless we're getting more. Is there?
I do have a question for you all, but if should, well, I'll ask mine first, and then you can ask yours.
Okay.
So I have a question from Shelley Langdale, who asked if both Tanekeya and Stephanie could share a bit about what drew them to printmaking, because you both have sort of a broader range for your practice. And it's interesting to note that you seem to make works in small editions with a lot of handwork. So if you could talk about that a little.
I'll let Stephanie go first.
Sure. I feel like I came to printmaking in sort of a non-linear, non-traditional way. I started screen printing, I think 10 years ago, but I really started working with patterns and printing and repeat when I went, to study textile and surface design. And so that, I'm still working through how to bridge the textile practice with the works on paper. And that's something that I'm really excited to continue exploring. But yeah, I primarily print with screen print and monoprint because I just love the painterly aspect of mono printing. And I do a little bit of relief print too, but it's mostly like block printing on fabric. Yeah, and I think that the thing that really drew me to it and continues to draw me to it is the fact that it does feel empowering to be able to replicate, you know, your own images into, like I've said this many times, but a lot of the photographs that I'm working with, they are, you know, small wallet-sized photographs, or they're photographs that maybe weren't preserved in the best way. So this is my way to kind of like bring them forward, and, you know, weaving my own memories and thoughts into them, but also preserving them and bringing them into the future and kind of, you know, sharing them with the next generation.
I started printmaking. I went to arts middle school. So I've been doing writing, printing, and painting for a very long time. I started getting serious about it when I interned at Pyramid Atlantic. And I started screen printing first. I think that was, I'm going to age myself, probably like 11 or 12 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And then I picked it back up to do more with it. Then I started doing like litho and all that in grad school, in between my doctoral program, to be sane. And then after Black Women to Print started, I just kept it up, trying to experiment more, bringing my hand into it, because I get bored, easily. And I also I like to bring my fractal self into these things. So if I'm having to just do something that's monotonous, although I love the multiples, that's gonna burn me out quickly. So I like to, print and then come back to it with a little bit more soul food.
Yeah, thank you. Laurel, I have a question that perhaps you could help us with. Could you situate Emma Amos more in her own context, perhaps speaking of a lineage that she might have been choosing to work within?
Sure, yeah. It's really interesting because our exhibition, surveys Amos's whole career and really shows, I think, so many different influences. So she is an art student in the late 50s, early 60s, and she goes to London to study etching, so the printmaking technique. And when she's there, she sees a bunch of exhibitions that feature abstract expressionist painters, mostly works by American artists. And she sort of declares herself an abstract expressionist, and some of her works, some of the very early works I showed in the presentation, show that really abstract sort of idiom that she's working with early on. So she moves to New York in the early 1960s and sort of quickly moves away from a strict abstract style, and she finds herself a member of the very important and influential but fairly short-lived group Spiral, which was a Black arts collective that formed basically to sort of debate the role of art in the civil rights movement. And she was the youngest member, the only female member of that group, but that's kind of the context that we see her sort of becoming an artist in the 60s in New York. And she exhibits with them in 1965, and then basically turns to, as she describes it, finds the figure in her painting and in her printmaking practice. And she sort of leaves behind this strict abstract style and moves really to sort of, she keeps depicting the figure throughout her whole career in different ways. But in 1980, she becomes a professor at Rutgers of art. She passed away last year, as we mentioned, and it was sort of publicly acknowledged for the first time that she was a guerrilla girl, which was sort of the anonymous group of activist artists that staged sort of direct actions commenting on the sexism and racism of museum institutions and other art institutions. So she sort of has this amazing, very long career in New York City from the 60s to the 2000s, engaging with different groups and politics. Hope that helps.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And you mentioned she brought the figure into her work, and we do have a comment in the Q&A that somebody who saw the show had just felt this overwhelming sense of connection with her prints of women and the power with which she depicted women. And
Mm.
I think that's something I would agree with as well.
Yeah, and it evolves. I think it's so interesting the way the figure, sort of in the 60s, it's this kind of, yeah, it's sort of emerging out of her abstract style. It's this, the shapes are sort of organic and sort of rhyming with other textures that she's depicting in the background. And then, you know, it really, the way that she approaches the figure really changes. And I think the show does a great job of showing that evolution, but also the sort of consistent way that the figure remains a really anchor and site of investigation for her in the variety of materials that she works in.
Yeah, we're just sort of at the end of the program, but Laurel, if you did want to ask that last question, it'll be our last, and then we'll,
Sure, it's,
yeah.
yeah, maybe not a bad note to end on, and it actually is about the figure and especially the printed women, the bathers, and it's another sort of quote that I come back to that Amos said in an interview, or maybe in yeah, another context. She says about those printed bathers, I'm doing etched women who stare out from their plates and pressed paper. I love their attitude. They are my solid ground. And I just love the way that these figures, like that Amos herself is making, offering a sense of, that they offer for Amos a sense of sort of security or grounding and foundation. And it just makes me want to ask you, Tanekeya and Stephanie, like what stabilizes you, what energizes your practices, what's your solid ground?
My solid ground is creating works of art and also writing and advocating for Black women to situate myself at the center, show up wholly, and also understand that there's nothing more powerful than image narratives, and to also realize that we must focus on the Black gaze versus the white gaze.
I would say my solid ground. I'm thinking of a quote from Emma Amos where she was saying that she's doing what she wants to do. You know, she was just like, I'm gonna do what I want to do. And she was referring to her practice and just the fact that she always knew that she was an artist and that, you know, she wasn't too concerned about the market during her lifetime. So I think that's something that I come back to a lot. And that I think is a solid ground to stand on. It's just, yeah, her commitment and her determinations to commit to her practice are something that I'm going to take with me as a solid ground to stand on.
I think that's a really lovely note to end on. Well done, Laurel. Thank you for that question. And thank you all for what you shared with us tonight. I'm really grateful we had the opportunity to come together to honor Emma Amos in this way and to see this really exciting new work that you shared with us, Tanekeya and Stephanie. So thank you.
Thank you all for having
Thank
us.
you.
And thank you all for attending.
Sorry.
Thank you
So much, everyone.
And we're getting lots of thanks in the chat as well. And I just want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge that this program was supported in part by the Association of Print Scholars through a collaboration grant. So our thanks go out to them for helping make this possible. And of course, thank you to all of you who joined us this evening. We're so appreciative of those of you who gave a donation when you registered to join, to our members for their continuing support, and primarily just to share the space with all of you this evening. I hope we'll see you again soon, whether that's at the museum, perhaps in the Emma Amos exhibition while it's still up through January 17th, or at our next virtual program. I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. It is going to be a poetry reading in response to Jasper Johns, which is another exhibition we have on view. So love to see you at that if you're available. The only other thing I'll say is there's a survey when this browser closes. It helps us make our programs better to hear from you. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
everyone, have a great night.